The heavy glass doors of the grand ballroom swung open, and 300 of the nation's wealthiest elites turned in stunned silence as I walked down the marble staircase. The golden chandeliers cast a warm glow across the room, but the atmosphere was ice cold. Clutched in my left hand was a leather binder containing 10 years of corporate fraud, forged land titles, and covert wire transfers. By my side stood Freya Hale, her dark chestnut hair styled elegantly, wearing a simple high-necked emerald gown and the centuries-old Ashford heirloom necklace. On the far side of the room, standing beside a tier of crystal champagne glasses, was Isolde Kensington. Her face went completely drained of color. The platinum-blonde heiress who had once ruled the city's social hierarchy now took a frantic step backward, her diamond-encrusted heels slipping on the polished floor. Beside her, Theron Mercer reached into his coat for a phone, but two federal officers stepped into his path, clicking steel handcuffs around his wrists before he could make a single call. Isolde dropped to her knees right there on the marble floor. Her custom white designer dress crumpled beneath her as mascara ran down her pale cheeks in dark streaks. "Declan, please," she sobbed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings as the crowd gasped and backed away from her. "You can't do this to me. I loved you. Theron tricked me. He made me do it. Please, just talk to me." I paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking down at the woman who had spent years treating me like a trophy while plotting my complete destruction. My steel blue eyes were dead quiet. "You didn't love me, Isolde," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a razor. "You loved the Ashford fortune. And now, you don't even have that." I walked right past her without stopping, Freya's hand held firmly in mine. But to understand how I ended up standing in that ballroom, watching the most powerful family in the metropolis collapse in a single evening, you have to understand the nightmare I lived before I woke up. In my past life, I was the sole heir to Ashford Industries, a century-old conglomerate built on shipping, real estate, and global finance, and I was an absolute fool. I was completely blinded by Isolde Kensington. She was breathtaking, haughty, and predatory, moving through high society like a queen. When she accepted my engagement ring, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. I showered her with luxury villas, private jets, and voting shares in my family's company. I ignored every warning sign, every subtle smirk she shared with her business advisor, Theron Mercer. The only person who tried to save me was Freya Hale. Freya was the daughter of Edwin Hale, my family's loyal personal chauffeur who had driven my father for 30 years. Freya had graduated top of her class in financial analytics, working quietly in our corporate risk department. One rainy night, she came to my private office with a stack of audited ledgers. She showed me how Isolde and Theron were secretly siphoning millions into offshore shell companies in the Grand Cayman Islands, preparing a hostile takeover that would strip the Ashford family of everything. But I was so intoxicated by Isolde's charm that I accused Freya of jealousy. I humiliated her in front of the entire executive staff, had her father fired without a pension, and banned her from ever stepping foot on Ashford property again. My reward for that blind arrogance was an agonizing, solitary death. Less than 2 years after our wedding, Isolde and Theron executed their trap. They framed me for massive bank fraud, froze my personal accounts, and stripped my sick father of his medical insurance. When I lay dying in a cold, sterile ward of a public charity hospital, penniless and abandoned by everyone I had ever bought gifts for, Isolde didn't visit me once. Theron was already living in my family's ancestral estate. The only person who walked through those hospital doors on my final night was Freya Hale. She sat by my bedside in the dark, holding my trembling hand as tears streamed down her face. As my pulse faded to nothing on the heart monitor, the last thing I saw was Freya's gentle, sorrowful eyes. And then, everything went black. A violent gasp tore through my lungs. I sat bolt upright, drenched in cold sweat, clutching my chest where the final cardiac arrest had stopped my heart. But there were no hospital monitors. I was sitting on a plush, king-sized bed in my penthouse suite, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the sprawling metropolis skyline. I scrambled toward the nightstand and grabbed my phone. The digital clock read 7:15 a.m., June 14th. I stared at the calendar in utter disbelief. It was exactly 3 days before my grand engagement ceremony to Isolde Kensington. I was back. 10 years of bitter betrayal, public humiliation, and financial ruin were washed away, but every single memory remained burned into my mind. My hands stopped trembling as a cold, absolute resolve settled in my chest. Fate had dragged me back from the grave, not to give me a second chance at romance, but to deliver a brutal reckoning to those who had destroyed my family. I picked up the smartphone, dialed the executive office of the Metropolitan Palace, and spoke into the receiver with a voice as calm as ice. "This is Declan Ashford. Cancel the Ashford-Kensington engagement ceremony scheduled for Saturday night immediately. Terminate all contracts and wipe the guest list." There was a frantic pause on the line. "Mr. Ashford, cancel the engagement?" But Miss Kensington said. "I don't care what she said," I interrupted coldly. "Cancel it now." But I wasn't prepared for what happened when I opened my front door 10 minutes later. Standing in the marble hallway outside my penthouse was my father's veteran chauffeur, Edwin Hale. He was dressed in his sharp charcoal uniform, holding a ring of brass car keys. In my past life, this was the morning Isolde had convinced me to fire him, claiming his presence was unfitting for a modern billionaire dynasty. Looking at Edwin now, alive, healthy, and loyal, a tight lump formed in my throat. He bowed his head respectfully. "Good morning, young Master Declan. The limousine is prepped for your morning meeting with the Kensington family." I stepped out into the hall, looking Edwin directly in the eyes. "Edwin, put the keys away. From this moment on, your salary is doubled, and I want full, lifetime medical coverage assigned to your family through the Ashford Corporate Trust starting today." Edwin blinked in utter astonishment, his jaw slackening as he stared at me. "Mr. Declan, I don't know what to say. You've always been generous, but why such a sudden policy change?" I placed a firm, steady hand on his shoulder. "Because you are family, Edwin, and I am done letting snakes dictate who belongs in my house. Now, take me to the Ashford corporate headquarters. I have a meeting with your daughter." 20 minutes later, the sleek black Maybach pulled up outside the 60-story glass monolith of Ashford Tower. I bypassed the main executive floor and walked directly down to the lower level of the corporate risk analytics wing. Tucked away in a quiet glass-walled corner office was Freya Hale. She was sitting behind a desk covered in financial printouts, her long chestnut hair gathered in a neat, low ponytail, wearing a modest gray button-up blouse. She looked up as the door opened, her warm amber eyes dilating in surprise as I stepped into her workspace. In my past life, I had rarely glanced at her, viewing her only as the chauffeur's quiet daughter. But looking at her now, I saw the fierce intelligence and unyielding dignity that had made her the only human being to stay by my side when I was dying in poverty. "Mr. Ashford?" Freya stood up quickly, her expression cautious. "Did my father send you down here?" "There is no issue with your father, Freya," I said, stepping into the office and closing the frosted glass door behind me. I sat down across from her. "I am here because of you. Effective immediately, I am appointing you as Chief Financial Analyst for the Ashford Family Executive Board." Freya froze, her pen lingering an inch above her notepad. She stared at me, searching my face for any sign of a cruel joke. "Chief Financial Analyst? Mr. Ashford, that position reports directly to the Board of Directors. Why would you offer that to me? You barely know who I am." "I know exactly who you are," I answered softly, my voice filled with a gravity that made her breath catch. "You are the sharpest mind in this entire building, and unlike the suits sitting on the top floor, you actually care whether this company survives." Freya shifted uncomfortably, her amber eyes narrowing with sharp suspicion. "Is this a game, Declan? Did Miss Kensington suggest this? Because if this is some corporate test to see if my father's position gives me unfair access, I suggest you ask your fiancée directly." The mention of Isolde's name made my eyes turn to cold steel. "Isolde Kensington has no say in how I run my company," I stated firmly, leaning forward across the desk. "In fact, by the end of this week, the Kensington family will no longer have any association with Ashford Industries whatsoever." Freya leaned back, her breath hitching as she processed my words. She was an expert data scientist. She knew the strategic weight of the proposed Kensington merger. "You're breaking off the engagement?" "Declan, that merger involves $3 billion in cross-collateralized loans. If you pull out, Kensington Capital will retaliate immediately." "Let them try," I said, a slow, dangerous smile touching my lips. "I know every shell company Theron Mercer operates. I know every offshore account they use to mask their liabilities. But to dismantle them, I need someone I can trust with my life. I need you, Freya." She looked at me for a long moment, the air thick with intensity. She didn't know about the past life, but she could feel the absolute sincerity in my gaze. "If I accept this role, Declan," she said quietly, "I answer only to the truth." "That is exactly what I am paying you for," I replied. But as I walked out of her office, my personal phone began to vibrate violently. The screen of my phone lit up with an incoming call from Isolde Kensington. When I didn't answer, a barrage of text messages flooded the screen. "Declan, What is this ridiculous rumor about canceling the Metropolitan Palace booking? Call me right now. I silenced the phone and slipped it into my suit pocket. She thought this was a temporary tantrum, a wealthy heir acting out before stepping down the aisle. She had no idea the man she was dealing with had already died by her hand. For the next 48 hours, I worked in complete secrecy with Freya. We transformed a secure private suite on the top floor of Ashford Tower into our war room. Freya's analytical genius was breathtaking. It's unbelievable, Freya murmured late Thursday night, staring at a node graph on her screen. Theron Mercer has set up 5 separate holding companies in the Grand Cayman Islands. They're using dummy billings to draw capital directly out of your shipping division. If this merger had gone through on Saturday, they would have had legal authorization to merge those liabilities into Ashford's balance sheet. It's a predatory asset strip. She turned to look at me, her cheeks flushed with discovery. Declan, how did you suspect this? These transfers were disguised as routine fleet maintenance. I stood behind her chair. Because snakes always bite from the same angle, Freya. Saturday night arrived. Despite my cancellation order, Isolde and her mother, Vivienne Kensington, had used their clout to keep the Grand Gala venue open. They believed that once the 300 high society guests arrived, I would be forced to show up to avoid a public scandal. The grand ballroom was a sea of velvet tuxedos, silk gowns, and flashing paparazzi cameras. Standing at the top of the marble staircase was Isolde Kensington. She was breathtakingly beautiful, wearing a floor-length white designer gown with intricate lace detail along the collar, her long platinum blonde hair styled in regal waves. Beside her stood Theron Mercer, wearing a tailored black tuxedo, swirling champagne with an arrogant smirk. Vivienne Kensington was holding court near the media stage, laughing with high-profile journalists. "Oh, Declan is just putting the final touches on his speech upstairs," Vivienne cooed. "Tonight, Kensington and Ashford become one empire." Right at that moment, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. The chatter of 300 socialites ceased instantly. Photographers turned their lenses toward the entrance as I stepped into the hall. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit, carrying an aura of cold authority. But what caused an immediate wave of audible gasps was the woman beside me. Walking arm in arm with me was Freya Hale. She wore a stunning, modest, high-necked emerald dress that complemented her warm chestnut hair and luminous amber eyes. Around her neck sparkled the Ashford Emerald, the legendary heirloom necklace that my family had possessed for 3 generations, a jewel traditionally worn only by the official matriarch of the Ashford dynasty. Isolde's glass of champagne froze halfway to her lips. Her ice blue eyes widened in total disbelief as she stared at the necklace on Freya's neck. I walked steadily down the central red carpet and stepped onto the microphone podium. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing clearly through the speaker system. "I appreciate you all gathering tonight. But there has been a significant change in the evening's program." Vivienne Kensington hurried forward, her face tight with a forced smile. "Declan, darling, what are you doing? Come up the stairs to Isolde." I held up a single hand, stopping Vivienne in her tracks. Effective immediately, the proposed merger between Ashford Industries and Kensington Capital is permanently terminated. Furthermore, my engagement to Miss Isolde Kensington is officially dissolved. The room exploded into utter chaos. Camera shutters whirred like gunfire. Isolde's face went completely pale, her haughty composure shattering in a single second. She sprinted down the marble stairs, her eyes wild with fury and humiliation. "Declan, are you insane?" she shrieked, cornering me near the VIP lounge entrance as security formed a perimeter. "You are ruining my family's name. Who is this serving girl you brought here? Have you completely lost your mind?" I looked down at her glowing blonde hair and panicked blue eyes. "I haven't lost my mind, Isolde," I whispered softly. "I know about Theron, I know about the Grand Cayman accounts, and I know what you did." That was the exact moment her world began to burn. Isolde's breath caught in her throat. The color drained from her skin so fast she looked like a marble statue. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words, but nothing came out. The mention of the Grand Cayman accounts hit her like a physical blow. She glanced frantically over her shoulder toward Theron Mercer, who was standing 20 feet away. Theron's arrogant smirk had vanished, replaced by a dark, lethal scowl as he realized his entire covert operation had just been named in front of the press. Before Isolde could utter a word of defense, I turned my back on her, taking Freya's arm, and walked out of the palace through a private exit. The next morning, the financial world experienced a massive shockwave. Front-page headlines across every major outlet featured photos of the dramatic rejection. ASH forwarded Heir dumps Billionaire, Fiancée AE8 altar. Kensington murder collapses. Kensington Capital's stock plunged 12% within the first hour of trading. In their high-rise corporate tower, Vivian Kensington was holding an emergency board meeting, screaming at PR managers to spin the story. They launched an immediate smear campaign, releasing releases claiming that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown and was being manipulated by an unscrupulous lower-level employee. I sat in the master office of Ashford Tower, watching the media storm unfurl on the screens. Sitting across from me was Freya, working calmly on her laptop, despite the pressure outside our doors. "They're coming at us hard, Declan," Freya reported, pointing to a real-time sentiment tracker. "Vivian Kensington has hired 3 major crisis management firms. They're trying to convince your board of directors to invoke Article 9, the emergency clause that allows the board to freeze your voting control if you demonstrate mental incompetence." "Article 9 requires a majority vote from the senior executive committee," I said coldly, taking a sip of black coffee. "And the key to that committee is Arthur Vance, our chief legal counsel. In my past life, Arthur was bought off by Theron with a villa in the Mediterranean, but this time, Arthur hasn't received a single penny." I stood up and walked over to Freya's desk, placing a flash drive beside her keyboard. "On this drive are the unredacted digital logs of Theron Mercer's private communications server. Upload these files to the Federal Financial Crime Bureau's secure tip portal." Freya inserted the drive, her eyes scanning the file directory. Suddenly, she gasped, her hands hovering over the keyboard. "Declan, these logs show Theron was planning to short Ashford stock right after the merger. He was intentionally trying to bankrupt your shipping line to buy it back at pennies on the dollar. This is systemic economic treason." She looked up at me, her amber eyes wide with awe. "If the authorities verify these records, Theron won't just lose his business license, he'll be facing 20 years in federal prison." "Verify them, send them, and prepare our counteroffensives," I commanded quietly. Just then, my office landline rang. I picked up the receiver and placed it on speaker. Theron Mercer's smooth, oily voice filled the room. "Declan, my friend," Theron said, trying desperately to maintain his polished tone, though I could hear the faint tremor of panic beneath his words. "Look, Saturday night was a huge misunderstanding. Isolde is devastated. Why don't you and I meet privately at the Capitol Club tonight? Just 2 businessmen talking out a resolution over scotch." I listened to his snake-like persuasion, remembering how this exact man had stood over my hospital bed in the past life, laughing as he signed the papers that evicted my father. A cold, quiet chuckle escaped my lips. "Theron," I said softly into the microphone, "do you know what happens to a house built on sand when the tide comes in?" There was a long silence on the line. "What are you talking about, Declan?" "I'm talking about your Cayman holding accounts, Theron. Federal agents are opening the files right now. Enjoy your scotch tonight, because it's the last glass you will ever drink as a free man." I hung up before he could reply. By Tuesday afternoon, the tension inside Ashford Tower had reached a boiling point. Kensington Capital was desperate, their stock was bleeding value by the hour, and major institutional investors were threatening to pull their funding unless the engagement was reinstated or the merger was completed. Isolde knew that her entire lifestyle, her status, and her family's fortune depended on forcing me back to the negotiating table. When professional charm and media smear campaigns failed, she decided to use the one weapon she believed I could never resist, herself. It was past 8 o'clock in the evening. Most of the executive staff had left for the day, leaving only Freya and me in the upper-level suites working through strategic plans. Suddenly, the private elevator doors opened, and Isolde Kensington stepped out onto the quiet floor. She was dressed in an impossibly seductive, high-end designer black dress that hugged every curve of her figure, her platinum blonde hair cascading down her shoulders in loose waves. She smelled of expensive jasmine perfume, carrying herself with the grace of a woman used to having men fall at her feet. Freya immediately stood up from her desk, her posture defensive as Isolde glided past her without even granting her a glance, treating the driver's daughter like invisible furniture. Isolde pushed open my office door and stepped inside, closing it softly behind her. She walked toward my desk with a slow, deliberate stride, her ice-blue eyes gleaming with a mixture of predatory hunger and artificial softness. "Declan," she purred, her voice dripping with sweet, intoxicating vulnerability. "Did you really think you could discard me so easily, after everything we shared?" She reached my desk, resting her manicured hands on the polished wood, leaning down close to me so that her perfume filled the air. In my past life, a single look like this from Isolde would have made me drop everything, apologize endlessly, and surrender whatever she asked for. I sat back in my leather chair, watching her performance with complete detachment. "You're trespassing, Isolde," I said flatly. "Security will be here in 3 minutes to escort you from the building." Isolde's eyes flashed with a momentary spark of irritation, but she quickly masked it, walking around the desk and attempting to place a delicate hand on my shoulder. "Oh, stop this silly revenge game, Declan," she whispered dramatically. "I know why you're doing this. You're angry because you thought I was giving Theron too much attention. You're jealous, but Theron means nothing to me. He was just a tool to help build our future empire. It's always been you, Declan. You are the only man worthy of standing beside me." I grabbed her wrist before her fingers could touch my suit, holding it with a firm, icy grip that made her eyes widen in shock. I looked into her face, seeing past the makeup and jewelry straight into the hollow vacuum of her soul. "You really believe your own lies, don't you?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "You think you can play men against each other, trade your body for corporate power, and walk away clean. But I don't see a billionaire heiress standing here, Isolde. I see a parasite whose host just woke up." Isolde gasped, trying to pull her wrist back, her face contorting into pure rage as her seductive facade completely shattered. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice rising to an ugly screech. "You arrogant bastard, you were nothing before I gave you social legitimacy. You think that low-class driver's daughter out there can replace me? She's a nobody. If you don't sign the merger by tomorrow, I will make sure Kensington Capital destroys Ashford Industries. You will end up penniless in the gutter." "The gutter is where I learned who you really are, Isolde," I answered calmly, as security arrived and escorted her screaming from the floor. The next morning, the financial media went into a frenzy. Driven to absolute desperation by her humiliation in my office, Isolde and her mother went live on a national morning television network. Sitting on a velvet couch in front of millions of viewers, Isolde played the ultimate victim. Wearing a modest pastel dress with minimal makeup, she dabbed fake tears from her eyes as Vivienne held her hand. "Declan has changed. He's fallen under the influence of manipulative people who are taking advantage of his family's wealth," Isolde sobbed to the interviewer. The public's sympathy immediately swung toward Kensington Capital. Stock commentators began speculating that Ashford Industries was facing an internal leadership crisis. But while Isolde was putting on an acting performance on television, Freya and I were launching our definitive financial counterstrike. At 10 o'clock sharp, Ashford Industries held an emergency global press conference in the grand auditorium of our headquarters. Over 100 international financial journalists filled the seats, cameras broadcasted live across economic news channels worldwide. I walked on to the brightly lit stage wearing a pristine charcoal suit, standing behind the executive podium. Beside me, walking with absolute grace, intelligence, and dignity, was Freya Hale. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer and pencil skirt, carrying a sleek digital tablet containing our master presentations. The room buzzed with intense speculation. Journalists shouted questions about Isolde's interview, demanding to know if Ashford was canceling its financial commitments. I raised a hand, commanding instant silence across the auditorium. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," I announced clearly into the microphones. "Today, Ashford Industries announces the complete closure of all historical negotiations with Kensington Capital. But more importantly, we are launching our next-generation global logistics initiative, the Ashford Enterprise Trust." I gestured toward the massive LED screen behind us, where complex economic charts lit up the room. "This multi-billion-dollar initiative will be headed personally by our newly appointed Vice President of Strategic Finance, Miss Freya Hale." A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the room. The cameras zoomed in on Freya as she stepped up to the secondary podium. With total calm, articulate precision, and breathtaking expertise, Freya delivered a brilliant 20-minute breakdown of the new initiative. She presented data models that demonstrated how Ashford would double its annual yield while completely cutting out intermediary firms, specifically targeting the inflated supply chain networks controlled by Kensington Capital. Sitting in her luxury penthouse, watching the live broadcast on her high-definition television, Isolde Kensington watched the woman she had mocked as a servant girl command the respect of the global financial elite. Isolde's hands trembled violently as she held her coffee cup, watching the tickers at the bottom of the screen. As Freya spoke, Ashford Industries stock surged 7% in real-time trading, while Kensington Capital's market value plummeted another 14%, crossing into critical bankruptcy territory. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Isolde hurled her porcelain cup at the television screen, shattering the display into a web of broken glass and sparks. No, 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 she screamed, clutching her head as her mother ran into the room. She's a driver's daughter. She's supposed to be nothing. Why is Declan looking at her like that? Why isn't he looking at me? Isolde couldn't comprehend that Declan's heart was no longer her plaything. But as Kensington Capital teetered on destruction, Theron Mercer decided to make one final move to secure his freedom. Thursday evening brought the annual Metropolitan Economic Leadership Summit, the most exclusive gathering of industrial tycoons and political figures in the country. The event was held at the magnificent Grand Palace Hotel. In previous years, Isolde Kensington had reigned supreme at this summit, using her status to dictate market trends. But tonight, the atmosphere was drastically different. The fallen heiress arrived with her mother, wearing an ostentatious silver gown, attempting to maintain her regal posture, but the crowd gave her a wide, uncomfortable berth. Whispers followed her every step. Look at her, Kensington Capital is underwater, she got dumped at the altar. Isolde's teeth ground together as she held a glass of mineral water, her pale eyes scanning the entrance frantically. Suddenly, the double doors were opened by hotel attendants, and the room went completely quiet. I walked into the ballroom, looking imposing and powerful in a double-breasted black tuxedo. By my side, holding my arm with effortless confidence, was Freya. She wore a magnificent dark emerald velvet dress that draped elegantly over her silhouette, her chestnut hair styled in soft waves. She wore the Ashford heirloom emerald brooch pinned near her heart. The contrast between the two women was blinding. Isolde looked like a desperate, fading relic of fake luxury, while Freya embodied genuine grace, intelligence, and modern power. Prominent CEOs and international diplomats immediately surrounded us, shaking my hand and eagerly introducing themselves to Freya, having been mesmerized by her press conference performance earlier that week. Isolde couldn't take it anymore. Driven mad by jealousy and humiliation, she pushed her way through the circle of executives, her silver dress swishing loudly against the floor. Enjoying your little play act, Freya? Isolde sneered, her voice carrying across the quieted circle of elites. She looked Freya up and down with venomous disgust. You really think putting on a nice dress and holding Declan's arm makes you one of us? You're still just Edwin the chauffeur's daughter. You grew up in the servants' quarters. You think these people respect you? They're laughing at you behind your back. The surrounding executives gasped at Isolde's crude attack. Vivian Kensington smirked from a few feet away, expecting Freya to crumble into tears under the weight of her lower-class background. In my past life, Freya might have backed down to protect her father's job, but tonight, standing beside a man who trusted her completely, Freya didn't flinch. She took a step forward, looking Isolde dead in the eyes with a calm, amused smile that cut deeper than any insult. You're right, Miss Kensington, Freya spoke clearly, her voice echoing through the silent ballroom. My father is a chauffeur. He is an honest man who built a life with hard work, integrity, and honor. He never stole a single dollar from anyone. Can you say the same about your family? Isolde's face flared brilliant red. What did you say? Freya stepped closer, her tone dripping with quiet authority. I said, while my father was driving people with dignity, your family was forging maritime ledgers and hiding stolen capital in Cayman accounts. My background isn't a secret, Miss Kensington, but your family's financial crimes are about to be public record. The entire room burst into hushed commentary. Isolde stood frozen, unable to utter a single retort as the elite crowd openly shook their heads in disgust at her. I took Freya's hand, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles in front of every camera in the hall. Well spoken, Vice President Hale, I said softly, before looking over at Isolde with cold disdain. Security, please ensure guests who cannot maintain basic decorum are removed. As hotel security escorted Isolde out, Theron Mercer watched from the VIP balcony, dialing an underground fixer to execute a violent secondary plan. The night before the critical Ashford Board of Directors vote, a heavy rainstorm broke out over the metropolis. Lightning flashed across the glass facade of Ashford Tower as Freya and I worked late into the night inside my private office suite. The final financial dossier proving Theron Mercer's multi-million-dollar fraud was completely compiled, formatted, and encrypted. All we needed was to present it to the board at 9 o'clock the following morning. Exhausted from days of relentless work, Freya sat on the leather couch in my office, rubbing her temples. I walked over carrying 2 mugs of warm chamomile tea. I handed one to her and sat down on the opposite end of the couch. She looked at me, a soft smile touching her lips. Thank you, Declan, she murmured, taking a slow sip. I still can't believe how much has changed in just 1 week. A week ago, I was sitting in a basement office auditing shipping receipts, thinking you barely knew my name. And now, we're preparing to dismantle the biggest corporate conspiracy in the city. I looked at her in the soft amber light of the desk lamp. The rain beat against the heavy glass windows, creating an intimate sanctuary away from the chaotic world outside. I always knew who you were, Freya, I said quietly, my voice filled with a deep sorrow from the past life she knew nothing about. I was just too stupid, too blinded by superficial nonsense to see what was standing right in front of me. I let people poison my mind, but I promise you, I will never make that mistake again. Freya set her mug down on the coffee table and looked at me, her amber eyes searching mine with intense curiosity. Declan, why do you look at me sometimes like you're apologizing for something that happened years ago? You've been nothing but kind, protective, and respectful to me and my father. Why did your perspective shift so suddenly? I reached out, my fingers gently brushing a stray lock of chestnut hair behind her ear. Her skin was warm and soft. Because I saw a nightmare, Freya, I whispered truthfully. A nightmare where I lost everything, and you were the only person who stayed to hold my hand in the dark. Freya's eyes softened, a deep emotional warmth shining through her gaze as she placed her hand over mine. You don't have to carry the burden of the past alone anymore, Declan, she said softly. Whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together. The emotional tension between us was intoxicating, a quiet, powerful connection built on genuine trust and shared battles. But our quiet moment was violently shattered by the sudden screeching of the office emergency alarm. Red strobe lights began flashing across the ceiling, and the electronic lock on my office door clicked red. I jumped to my feet, pulling Freya behind me as the heavy oak door was kicked open with a loud bang. Stepping into the room were three muscular men dressed in dark tactical gear, their faces covered by black balaclavas. Standing behind them, holding a heavy suppressed pistol in his gloved hand, was Theron Mercer. His slicked-back auburn hair was disheveled, his eyes wild with unhinged, murderous desperation. Into the line, Declan, Theron snarled, stepping into the office as his mercenaries secured the hallway. You thought you could destroy my life and walk away with your little driver's daughter? Did you really think I'd let you hand those ledgers to the federal prosecutors tomorrow morning? He raised the weapon, pointing the barrel directly at my chest. But I didn't panic. I stood firmly in front of Freya, looking at Theron with a cold, calculating stare that caught him completely off guard. Put the gun down, Theron, I said calmly, my voice showing zero fear despite the suppressed pistol trained on my heart. You're already facing 20 years for wire fraud and market manipulation. If you pull that trigger, you will spend the rest of your life on death row. Theron let out a manic laugh, his finger tightening slightly on the trigger. You think I care about prison? If I'm going down, Ashford Industries dies with me. Hand over the encrypted flash drives, or I will put a bullet through both of you right here on this rug. Nobody is coming to save you. Is that what you think, Theron? I replied, taking a small, deliberate step forward, keeping my body anchored between him and Freya. You always underestimated me. You thought I was the same naive heir you played for 5 years. But you forgot one crucial detail about modern corporate security. I subtly shifted my right foot, pressing a concealed emergency pressure pedal built into the hardwood floor beneath my executive desk, a silent panic system linked directly to the Metropolitan Police SWAT Division and my private security force. Theron's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What are you talking about? Hand over the drive now. I'm talking about the fact that this office has been broadcasting live audio and video to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for the last 3 minutes, I revealed with a cold, victorious smirk. Every word of your extortion, every threat, and your presence in this building is being recorded on an off-site government server. You didn't just commit corporate crime tonight, Theron. You committed armed home invasion on live federal record. Theron's face turned ash gray. You're lying, he shrieked. But before he could react, the reinforced glass windows behind my desk shattered inward with an explosive boom. Flashbang grenades bounced across the hardwood floor, detonating with blinding white light and deafening concussive blasts. Pullis! Down on the ground! Drop your weapons! Tactical SWAT officers shouted as they rappelled down from the roof through the broken windows, while heavy door-breaching teams flooded in from the hallway. Theron's mercenaries were tackled to the floor within seconds. Theron tried to turn and run toward the private elevator, but I lunged forward, tackling him mid-stride. We crashed onto the floor, the pistol skidding out of his reach across the marble threshold. I pinned Theron down, grabbing his collar, looking into his terrified eyes. This is for my father. And for everything you stole in the dark, I growled, holding him pinned until heavy SWAT officers slammed handcuffs around his wrists and dragged him to his feet. As Theron was led away screaming in hysterical panic, emergency lights flashed through the shattered windows from 30 police cruisers parked on the street below. SWAT medics quickly checked on us, but we were unhurt. Freya rushed into my arms, wrapping her arms tightly around my neck, her body trembling slightly from the adrenaline rush. I wrapped my arms around her, burying my face in her chestnut hair, holding her close as if she were the most precious treasure in the universe. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, pulling back slightly to look into her face. She looked up at me, her amber eyes shining with tears of relief, a radiant smile breaking across her lips. "I am now," she whispered. "You saved us, Declan. We saved each other," I corrected her gently. But while Theron was sitting in a federal holding cell, the final collapse of Kensington Capital was about to unfold. By Friday morning, news of Theron Mercer's midnight raid on Ashford Tower and his arrest by federal SWAT teams broke across every news network in the world. The unsealed federal indictment was catastrophic for Kensington Capital. The evidence seized from Theron's private servers proved conclusively that Isolde Kensington and her mother, Vivienne, were fully aware of the illegal offshore accounts and had actively assisted in laundering stolen assets through their family's real estate holdings. By 9 a.m., the Securities and Exchange Commission issued an emergency freeze on all bank accounts, investment portfolios, and property assets associated with Kensington Capital. The stock plummeted to absolute zero. Trading was permanently suspended. The once mighty Kensington Empire had collapsed into total, irreversible bankruptcy in less than 7 days. High society elites who had once begged for invitations to Vivienne's dinner parties wiped her name from their contact lists instantly. Federal marshals arrived at the luxurious Kensington estate in the affluent hills outside the city. They placed official seizure seals on the grand iron gates, foreclosing on the mansion, the fleet of luxury sports cars, and the private art collection. Vivienne Kensington suffered a complete nervous breakdown on the front lawn, screaming at reporters as her designer luggage was carried away by moving crews. Her social circle had vanished, her wealth was erased, and her name was ruined forever. Meanwhile, Isolde Kensington was left with absolutely nothing. Her credit cards were declined at every establishment in the metropolis. Her personal assistant quit. Her friends blocked her phone number, and the landlord of her private downtown apartment changed the electronic door codes due to unpaid rent. Stripped of her luxury gowns, her diamond jewelry, and her haughty status, she was forced to pack her remaining clothes into 2 cheap suitcases and wander the streets in a simple trench coat. She walked aimlessly through the busy downtown financial district, her hair unwashed, her face pale without her expensive makeup. Everywhere she looked, giant digital billboards mounted on the skyscrapers displayed images of Declan Ashford and Freya Hale. The headlines declared, "ASH Ford Industries surges to record Hig value. Declan, Ashford and Freya Hale announce Global Teach Partnership. The driver's daughter who saved an empire." Isolde stared up at a towering screen showing a massive photo of Declan and Freya standing shoulder to shoulder on a rooftop garden, smiling warmly at each other, looking like royalty. An agonizing wave of bitter, poisonous regret washed through Isolde's chest, tearing her soul apart. That was supposed to be her on that billboard. That luxury, that prestige, that global admiration had belonged to her. But she had thrown it all away for a greedy liar, treating the man who truly loved her like a fool. Desperate, hungry, and entirely out of options, Isolde made up her mind. She would find Declan. She would beg, she would kneel, she would cry, she would do whatever it took to make him take her back. She believed that deep down, Declan still carried an ember of his old obsession for her. She had no idea that the ember had been drowned in cold water long ago. A torrential downpour hit the city on Friday evening, flooding the streets and washing away the summer heat. Standing outside the iron security gates of the Ashford private estate, soaked to the bone, was Isolde Kensington. Her coat was heavy with water, her platinum blonde hair hung in wet strands over her face, and her mascara was running down her cheeks in dark streaks. She had been standing outside in the cold rain for over 3 hours, shivering violently, waiting for my vehicle to return. At 8 o'clock, the sleek black Maybach pulled up to the gates. Edwin Hale was driving, his hands firm on the steering wheel. As the iron gates began to slide open automatically, Isolde threw herself into the driveway, blocking the vehicle, waving her arms frantically in the headlights. Edwin brought the car to a smooth stop, looking into the rearview mirror. "Young Master Declan, Miss Kensington is blocking the path. Shall I call private security to remove her?" I looked through the tinted side window at the pathetic figure standing in the rain. Beside me sat Freya, holding a tablet, looking at me quietly. "No, Edwin," I said calmly. "Open the door. It's time to put an end to this once and for all." I stepped out of the vehicle, holding a large black umbrella, my charcoal suit pristine. Edwin held an umbrella over Freya as she stepped out beside me, standing respectfully at my side. The moment Isolde saw me, she burst into hysterical sobs. She ran forward and collapsed onto her knees directly on the wet asphalt, reaching out with trembling, mud-stained hands, grabbing the bottom of my trousers. Declan! Declan, please! She wailed, her voice cracking with pure desperation. I was wrong! I was so horribly wrong! Theron forced me into everything. He threatened me. I never loved him, Declan. I only ever loved you. She looked up at me, her ice blue eyes wide with desperate pleading, water dripping from her nose and chin. Look at me, Declan. Remember our nights in Paris? Remember how we promised to rule this city together? Just take me back. I'll be your wife. I'll do whatever you want. Please, don't leave me in the dark like this. I looked down at the woman kneeling in the mud before me. In my past life, seeing Isolde cry like this would have broken my heart, but looking at her now, I felt no warmth and no pity. Get up, Isolde, I said, my voice completely flat, carrying no emotion whatsoever. Declan, please, she sobbed, holding on to my shoe tighter. Give me one more chance, just one. I leaned down slightly, looking directly into her frantic blue eyes. In another life, Isolde, I gave you every chance. I gave you my trust, my fortune, and my heart. And you left me to die penniless in a cold hospital ward while you celebrated with Theron. You're not crying because you love me, Isolde. You're crying because you finally realized that the driver's daughter you despised is 10 times the woman you will ever be. Isolde froze, her hands slipping from my shoe as if she had been burned by sub-zero ice. She looked past me at Freya Hale, who stood beside me under the umbrella, quiet, elegant, and filled with effortless grace. You know, Isolde whispered in horror. I know everything, I replied coldly. I turned my back on her, taking Freya's hand. Edwin, pull the car inside and close the gates. As the heavy iron gates slid shut, locking Isolde out in the dark, rainy night, her desperate screams faded into the storm. With the Kensington Mercer conspiracy permanently dismantled, Ashford Industries entered an era of unprecedented growth and prosperity. The company's ethical restructuring and high-tech logistics initiatives made international headlines, drawing billions in new global investments. But for me, the greatest achievement wasn't the rising stock prices or the corporate awards. It was repairing the damage that had been done to the innocent people who had supported my family for decades. On a bright, sunny Monday morning, a grand ribbon-cutting ceremony was held at the newly constructed 60-acre distribution hub on the edge of the metropolis. Over 500 employees, media reporters, and corporate leaders gathered in front of the state-of-the-art facility. Standing on the central stage was Edwin Hale, dressed in a magnificent tailored navy suit, looking overwhelmed with pride. Beside him stood his daughter Freya, her face radiant with happiness. I stepped up to the podium, looking out at the crowd. Today, Ashford Industries unveils our master global logistics center, I announced into the microphone. And it is my distinct honor to officially name this facility the Edwin Hale Logistics and Fleet Center. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Edwin's eyes filled with tears of gratitude as I shook his hand warmly on stage. In my past life, this noble man had been fired and disgraced by Isolde's arrogance. Today, his name was carved in gold letters across a multi-million-dollar monument of global commerce. Later that evening, after the public celebrations had ended, I took Freya to the private cliffside garden overlooking the ocean at the southern edge of the metropolis. The sun was setting over the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of gold, crimson, and deep violet. The ocean breeze blew softly through Freya's chestnut hair as we walked along the stone path, listening to the gentle crashing of waves against the rocks below. Freya stopped near the marble balustrade, looking out at the endless horizon, a peaceful smile on her face. My father cried for an hour after the ceremony, Declan, she said softly, turning to look at me. He told me he never dreamed he would live to see a day like this. You gave him his dignity back. You gave us everything. I walked up to her, stopping just inches away, looking deep into her warm amber eyes. Your father gave my family 30 years of his life, Freya, I said, my voice filled with tender emotion. And you gave me your heart when I had nothing left to offer. You restored my faith in humanity. You showed me what real loyalty and true strength look like. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet ring box. I opened it, revealing a breathtaking emerald ring surrounded by platinum, the Ashford promise ring that my grandfather had crafted 50 years ago. Freya's breath caught in her throat as she looked from the glittering jewel to my eyes. Declan, she whispered. I don't offer you this ring as a corporate transaction, Freya, I said softly, taking her hand gently in mine. I offer it because you are my equal, my partner, and the only woman I will ever love. Will you stand beside me for the rest of our lives?" Tears of joy overflowed from Freya's eyes as she smiled radiantly. "Yes, Declan, 1,000 times yes." 6 months had passed since the night the Kensington Empire fell. The metropolis had moved on, but the legendary tale of Declan Ashford's rebirth and the rise of Freya Hale remained the most celebrated story in the country's business history. Ashford Industries had doubled its international valuation, becoming a global powerhouse of green technology and ethical finance. It was the evening of the annual International Charity Gala at the Grand Metropolitan Palace, the exact same venue where 6 months earlier my broken engagement had shocked the world. Tonight, the atmosphere was completely transformed. Golden lights flooded the ballroom, classical violins played sweet melodies, and the nation's most respected leaders gathered to honor Ashford Foundation's multi-million-dollar educational grants. The heavy oak doors swung open, and 300 guests turned to applaud as Freya and I entered the ballroom hand in hand. I wore a tailored black tuxedo with an emerald bow tie, while Freya was absolute perfection in a breathtaking ivory silk gown, her chestnut hair styled in an elegant updo, the Ashford promise ring glittering brightly on her finger. We moved through the room with effortless poise, warmly greeting foreign ambassadors and community leaders who genuinely respected our work. Meanwhile, outside the glittering palace, the cold autumn rain began to fall. Standing across the street, behind a metal barrier near the service entrance, was a small crowd of low-level catering workers and temp assistants waiting for their shift assignments. Among them was Isolde Kensington. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, wearing a plain black work uniform and a heavy apron, her hands rough and calloused from washing dishes at a local hotel catering firm. She stood shivering in the drizzle, holding a plastic tray of discarded glasses, staring across the street at the lit windows of the grand ballroom. She watched through the glass as Declan Ashford pulled Freya Hale into a gentle dance beneath the crystal chandeliers, the entire room looking at them with admiration and reverence. Isolde clutched the wet metal barrier, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. She had lost her fortune, her beauty had faded under the stress of manual labor, and her social status was gone forever. She remembered how she used to mock Freya, calling her a driver's daughter who didn't belong in luxury. Now, Freya was the revered matriarch of the most powerful dynasty in the country, while Isolde was standing in the rain clearing trash off the street. The bitter, poisonous regret burned in her stomach like acid, knowing that every single second of her current misery was the direct result of her own greed and cruelty. A catering supervisor shouted from the service door, "Hey, worker number 42, stop staring at the rich people and get back to scrubbing the pots inside." Isolde wiped her eyes with her dirty sleeve, bowed her head in shame, and walked back into the dark kitchen, swallowed up by the obscurity she had earned. Late that night, after the grand charity gala had concluded, Freya and I returned to the top floor of Ashford Tower. We walked out onto the private observation terrace, stepping into the quiet, crisp night air. Below us, the sprawling metropolis stretched out like a vast, glittering ocean of golden lights, quiet and beautiful beneath the starry sky. I wrapped a warm cashmere coat around Freya's shoulders, standing behind her, wrapping my arms gently around her waist as she leaned back against my chest. The cool night breeze blew gently across the terrace, but inside, I felt an overwhelming sense of warmth, peace, and absolute fulfillment. The long battle was over. The traitors had fallen, justice had been served, and the nightmare of my past life was permanently erased. Freya reached up, resting her soft hands over mine, looking up at the stars above. "What are you thinking about, Declan?" she asked softly, her voice like a gentle melody in the quiet night. I rested my chin softly against her head, breathing in the subtle scent of jasmine in her hair. I was thinking about how close I came to losing everything, and how blessed I am that fate brought me back to you. Freya turned around in my arms, looking up into my steel blue eyes with a gaze filled with endless love, trust, and devotion. "You didn't just rebuild an empire, Declan," she whispered, touching my cheek gently. "You restored justice. You saved my father. You saved his company, and you gave me a life I never dared to dream of." "We built this life together, Freya," I answered softly, leaning down to press a tender kiss against her lips. As our lips met under the moonlit sky, the memory of the cold hospital room, the dark betrayals, and the bitter loneliness vanished into the night forever. I had chosen the driver's daughter, the woman of true honor, intelligence, and heart over the fake glitter of an arrogant heiress. And as we held each other high above the quiet city, I knew that our new beginning was unbreakable, everlasting, and truly eternal. The morning sun began to peek over the eastern ocean horizon, casting golden light across the city skyline, illuminating the new day of an empire built on truth, loyalty, and undeniable love.